Good morning, or what's going on everyone? I am Adam Green from Green Auto Services, and in today's video we have a 2017 Audi A5 2-litre TDI diesel engine. It's with me today because the customer would like the cam belt and the water pump replaced, because with these 2-litre TDI engines, these cam belts are required to be changed every 5 years regardless of mileage. So we're not going to be going into too much in-depth detail regarding how to get down to the cam belt, rather than what you need to do, timing everything up, locking the cam sprockets in the crank, and be able to carry out a successful cam belt change. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. So the first thing we need to do is take this cowling off, but before we can do that we have to take the bonnet release handle off. Now this one you just need a little pick, pull out the locating tab, should just lift straight off. Then we can remove the cowling. The whole reason we've removed this is so we can actually remove the air intake flap just before the air filter housing. Just gives us that little extra bit more room to be able to take everything off for the cam belt cover. So now we've got that extra little bit of wiggle room, we're now going to remove the AdBlue injector. So the only thing I've done so far is just remove all these wires that are all in these retaining clips across the top of the cam belt cover, just to push them back a bit. Now be very careful, these actually come in two pieces like that, and there is a spring in between them. I like to remove it completely just so it saves hassle, and then we can remove it a lot easier. Okay, so once I've taken the retaining torque out of the front bracket here and the back bracket here, I have also disconnected the injector control multi-plug just back here and threaded it through. So now that should just lift up and we can thread it under there just to get that out of the way. It's a good idea to cover up the now exposed hole to the DPF, and to also cover the AdBlue injector back here. Just protects it from any dirt or moisture whilst we're working on the engine. But before we do anything else, this brown plug at the top here, that is your multi-plug connector for the electric water pump that we will be replacing. So whilst we're up here, we are going to just disconnect that. There we are, and straight off. So you might need a little pick to do it because it's just a little bit fiddly, but if you get it in the right place, that'll just lift off. Okay, so we now should be at a point where we can remove the cam belt cover. There are two locating tabs, one up here and one just in front of the electronic water pump that we've just disconnected. You pull the tabs forward, manipulation. That is the top cover removed. Okay, so the good news is, for now, that is all we can do at the top part of the engine. Now we need to get the car up in the air, remove the road wheels, and remove all the under trays. Off camera, I have removed the upper and the lower timing belt cover. Have fought with the under trays, managed to get the crank pulley off. So this is your timing belt for the engine. So the crank drives the cam belt. It runs round the tensioner, which we will be renewing, which then drives the camshaft sprocket, which is this one just here, and also drives the fuel pump sprocket as well, which supplies constant pressure to the high pressure common rail. And that's down there, then the last loop before it goes back to the crank, electronically controlled water pump, which we will be replacing. If you remember earlier, we disconnected that multi-plug just there, which connects to the multi-plug just there in front of my finger. I hope you can see that. Most importantly, before we remove the cam belt, is we need to time it up. Now, off camera, I've actually got this engine timed up, but first things first, you want to rotate the crankshaft via the crank pulley down there, which is a 19mm multi-splined nut, so you're going to need a 19mm multi-spline socket to turn it over. And basically you want to rotate the engine so you can get your locking tool, which you can just see on the bottom there. And again, on the diagram I will show you. Up at the top you can lock the camshaft via the sprocket. So I've just got this pin inserted. It goes through the center of that access hole there, and then through and locates into a hole in the actual cylinder head. And the same with the fuel pump. Now the fuel pump does free spin, it's not a timed pump. However, in regards to locking everything off and fitting the new belt much easier, you can see that the pin goes straight through, almost like a U-shape tab there, and then straight into the cylinder head again. And that is effectively how you lock off everything you need before removing the cam belt. So from here onwards, we are going to now remove that 15mm nut, take the cam belt off, remove the guides, the tensioner, and then we'll be removing the water pump as well. Okay, here we are guys, so now we're over at the bench. So we've stripped everything down, we've taken the timing belt off. This is the old timing belt here. We've also taken two guide pulleys off because we will be replacing them. They come with new ones in the kit. We have the water pump over here, which we will also be replacing at the same time. And of course, the new tensioner as well. So this little diagram you're looking at, the setup of the cam belt. So what we've done, we have timed up the timing belt before we've removed it. We've locked off the camshaft sprocket with a pin just there. We've locked off the fuel pump just there, which you can see is located just in there. That's kind of like a blown up version of it. And with the crankshaft, we have located the locking pin so that the crankshaft cannot move. So that is locked in top dead center. The camshaft is locked, the fuel pump is locked, everything else effectively is free spinning. So with any cam belts, if it drives the water pump, you're gonna want to replace it because you don't want to be in a position where you replace the cam belt, not the water pump. The new belt is going to be a little bit firmer because it's newer, it's going to be taut and putting extra unnecessary pressure on an older pump. So for the sake of the job, you want to replace the water pump at the same time. So this is an electronically controlled one, there we go, so it engages a clutch inside, so it's constantly free spinning, but it doesn't want to circulate the coolant because it wants the engine to get up to optimum temperature as soon as possible. Only when does it get into optimum temperature range, it will then kick in the clutch and then start circulating it around the system. So we're going to be replacing that. So first things first, we're going to replace the water pump with a brand new one, and it is a genuine one from a specialist Audi supplier. So as you can see down here, this is where the old one was. I've taken it out, and this is where the new one's going to go in. There is a rubber seal that sits right around the edge there, so we just want to give that a quick clean up to make sure there's no dirt or debris that's going to cause any issue with the new seal going on. Otherwise, you're going to have a coolant leak, and you'll be doing the job all over again. Now for this job, I'm just using some emery paper or wet and dry paper. You're just taking off some very, very light surface dirt and debris. 9 times out of 10, there's not going to be that much on there. It's all covered up and not exposed to the elements, but you shouldn't need to go at it too hard. As long as it's nice and clean and nice and smooth, you are going to have a solid seal when you put the new water pump on. And that is the water pump all done. So with a particular job like this, I always want to be 100% thorough that I have talked everything up as I'm going. So back on the diagram with my water pump, although it doesn't say it, I'm going to give that a tick to confirm that I have tightened that up and that is all done and I don't need to do anything else with that. So now we are going to go ahead and fit guide 1, but we're not going to fit guide 2 at the moment, and I'll tell you the reason why a little bit later. But for now, we are just going to tighten up guide 1, which is already here, 20 Newton meters, and we're going to just finger tight for the time being, put the tensioner on in place, which is the new one that comes in the new kit. Now that we've got the water pump back in and there's no more coolant coming out, it is still all a little bit wet down there from the coolant that's leaked out. So just make sure it's all nice and thoroughly cleaned and dried off. In this case, I'm just using some brake cleaner. Okay, so this is the new guide pulley. So this is guide pulley number 1, and the way it sits in regards to the engine, which you'll see when you take it out, is like that. So this kind of knurled, knobbly bit goes towards the back of the engine, and the more flatter face goes towards the front of the engine. So we're going to just literally slide that on to the stud, and then it also does come with a brand new nut, and we're going to be tightening this up to 20 Newton meters. Okay, so I've installed the first guide down at the bottom and it is now tightened up to 20 Newton meters. I have gone back over to my diagram and I've ticked off that guide, so I now know 100% sure that is tightened up and I don't need to do anything else with that. Next is the tensioner. So again, you want to check that the tensioner is correct, and in this case it is. When installing this, there is one incredibly important thing. So when you thread it onto the stud that holds it, this tab here locates in a specifically made recess in the left-hand side of the engine just underneath the sprocket. That has to undoubtedly locate in that tab, otherwise the tensioner is not going to work. You're probably going to put it all back together, start her up, you are going to have big issues which could very easily result in catastrophic failure to the engine. So when that's going on, make sure that that's located. Best thing to do is before you remove the old one, just see where that tab is located. And of course, does come with a brand new 15mm nut as well. It's a bit unfocused, but you have to take my word for it. That is a brand new one. So for the time being, you just want to do that up by hand because we want the tensioner to be able to move because we're going to be tensioning the cam belt once it all goes on and back together. So just literally nip it up just so it's touching it, and there's a tiny bit of play in there, but that's all you literally need. And another little note, before you forget, this is the water pump multi-plug socket for the electronic clutch. Make sure that that goes up back in there before you do anything else, because if you get that lost and you have to take it all apart and go get it, go fish it out, you're going to have a bad day. But we no longer have to do that. That is all now back in there. And whilst we're here, we might as well just put the multi-plug back on. It just makes sense. There we are, a nice little click into place, and that is all done. Okay, so now we need to install the new cam belt. Before you do anything, you want to make sure you stretch this, well, not stretch it out, just pull it out like that and hold it up with the other one to make sure that it's the right length. Again, I've already done that and it's absolutely fine. And as you can see there, we've got all the part numbers and everything you may need if you wish to get the parts yourself, but that is a genuine VW cam belt. So when it comes to installing this, start with the crankshaft sprocket. The instructions does say to work your way up anti-clockwise, so we're going to go up to the fuel pump, then the camshaft sprocket, around the tensioner, around the guide, and slip it on. Now, if you remember, we haven't yet put the upper guide in place. This is going to make installing of the new cam belt a lot easier. So get the new cam belt on. The other very important thing you want to remember, you want the belt to be nice and tensioned as much as possible on the crank and fuel pump side, or the non-tension side, because you want the slack to be between where it comes off the bottom of the camshaft sprocket and the tensioner, because effectively the tensioner, when we tension it, is going to be tightening up the slack side. And rule of thumb, I normally like to have the writing kind of in a readable way installed onto the engine, but do double check all the way around, because some manufacturers will have an arrow pointing the direction of rotation. Okay, so that's the new Cambelt on. So like previously advised, make sure that the side between the crank and the fuel pump, the non-tension side, is as taut as possible, and you'll feel that it'll be nice and taut and everything will locate nicely in the teeth of all the sprockets. Now that we've got everything on and everything is all in place, we can now fit the other guide pulley. Now again, I've compared it with the other one that came out. It's absolutely fine. This can be fitted either way, it doesn't matter. However, compared to the old one actually had some writing, which is, and all the part numbers, which this one has got just in here, facing the engine. So we're actually going to be putting it on towards the back of the engine. So this is where it locates, and this is why it's going to make, well, fitting the time belt a lot easier, because this one is actually putting a little bit more tension and pressure on the belt. So make sure you've got the new bolt, and you just want to very carefully just push down on the belt to give you a bit of space, and then just start screwing that in by hand. Now be very careful, make sure you don't cross thread the bolt, make sure it goes in by hand nice and easy, which it is. We can then get this tightened up, and you may have already guessed it, this is also 20 Newton meters. There we go, it's just starting to get tight. There we are, 20 Newton meters. So I'm going to go over to the diagram now and tick that off. Okay, so with this next part, now that we've got the guides on, the new Cambelt on, the new water pump on, the new tensioner, we now need to tension the Cambelt. So this is your tensioner here. You've got a pointed notch which needs to line up with that groove in the backing plate. So what you have to do is, using a 6mm hex or 6mm Allen key even, there is a place to put it in there, in the actual face of it. You want to rotate this clockwise until that pointer lines up with the notch, and then you want to tighten the nut 20 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. So I'm going to carry on rotating. Right, okay, here we go. So, where's that torch? As you can see, the notch has moved, and as I now move it, it's tightening up, and that is bang in the middle of that. The only unfortunate thing is the Allen key's in the way, so I'm going to take it out so I can get the Allen key out of the way. So you want to hold pressure on this Allen key to stop the tensioner from turning even more, whilst you do up the nut to the tightening torque. There we go. So making sure that doesn't move. There's 20 Newton meters, and then we're going to do 45 degrees. There we go. That's tightened up. So now I'll just get you in a little bit closer. I really should have a second pair of hands on this, but as you can see, that notch is now bang in the middle. The nut is tightened to 20 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. and that is effectively your cam belt all tightened up. So all we need to do now, we need to remove all the locking pins, so the one from the fuel pump rail, the camshaft sprocket and the crankshaft sprocket, and we now need to turn the engine over manually by hand and to make sure that everything settles in place and lines up perfectly and is still in time. Okay, here we go guys, so I have turned the engine over actually 8 times, so you've got to bear in mind the crank will rotate twice to make sure that the cam rotates 1 revolution. So it is very easy when you're timing these up to be 180 degrees out on the cam. However, I've turned it over 8 times, equal times, and I've got the locking pin back in on the crank. The pin has flown into the locking pin on the sprocket. I also marked it off there, so if you can just see, my white mark does line up perfectly. And I did also mark it off here. As you can see, there is a mark on the tooth at the front there compared to the white mark on the back of the plastic housing, and the locking pin has also located perfectly as well. Most importantly, when it comes to the tensioner, as long as that notch is either in the middle or 5 mil either side, left or right of that notch, you're absolutely fine. Now, from experience, I am more than happy with where that notch is. That's going to hold its tension, everything is timed up, so I'm now going to get everything back together. Okay, and there we have it. That is how you carry out a successful cam belt and water pump change on an Audi A5 with a 2 litre TDI diesel engine. Now, if you've liked what you've watched and perhaps even learned a little something, please don't forget to hit the like button and, more importantly, hit that subscribe button. We don't want you missing out on any videos, of which there are plenty more coming in down the line. On that note, I am Adam Green from Green Auto Services. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys in the next video.